Hello, I'm Gabby. Welcome to another episode of the Happier Life Project podcast, brought to you by the free, award-winning mental health and wellness app, My Possible Self. Today, we're tackling an issue so many of us face, and that's burnout. Burnout is more than just feeling really tired. It's a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion caused by prolonged stress, often related to work or demanding personal responsibilities. When stress becomes chronic, it can negatively impact our ability to function, think clearly, and take care of ourselves. Burnout leaves us feeling detached, overwhelmed, emotionally drained, irritable, and even hopeless. As burnout persists, it becomes increasingly difficult to manage daily tasks or maintain healthy relationships. Over time, burnout weakens your strength, immunity, and resilience, leaving you vulnerable to more serious health issues. It's not just about overworking, it's about how our minds and bodies struggle to cope with unrelenting pressure. Mental Health UK's new annual benchmark report for burnout in the UK revealed that 1 in 5 working adults needed to take time off employment in the past year due to poor mental health caused by pressure or stress. And over a third of adults experienced high or extreme levels of pressure and stress, always or often, in the past year. The poll by YouGov for Mental Health UK warns that the UK is at risk of becoming a burnout nation. Today, we welcome back a previous podcast guest, Dr. Claire Plumbly, a clinical psychologist and director of Good Therapy Limited, a trauma-focused therapy practice based in the UK. With over 20 years of experience helping individuals navigate anxiety, trauma, and burnout in both the NHS and private practice, Dr. Plumbly really knows what she's talking about. And she's also the author of Burnout: How to Manage Your Nervous System Before It Manages You. In this very episode, Dr. Claire will help us to unpack the complex issue of burnout, what it is, how it affects us, and most importantly, how to prevent and manage it before it takes control of our lives. Dr. Claire shares some of the more common and less common signs of burnout and explains what the catastrophic consequences can be if you try to soldier on for too long. We also talk about the normalisation of overworking in today's world and the cultural, societal and internal pressures to be always on the go. So, ready to find a healthier, happier you? Let's get started. Dr. Claire Plumbly, welcome back to the Happier Life Project podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for returning. As we were saying before we got rolling, the last episode we recorded was our Ask the Expert, where we were covering all things Christmas. And here we are in September as we record this. I can't believe nearly a year has gone.
I know, it's sped by, hasn't it?
It really has. So when we talked last time, you gave me the heads up about a book that you were writing, and this is going to be our main focus of today's conversation, which is burnout. Mm-hmm. And before we really dive into it all, a couple of things. Do you think we're in the burnout generation? Are we too quick to self-diagnose and maybe not? And what inspired you to write such a detailed manuscript on this particular subject?
Yeah, I think it's hard to know whether burnout is getting worse or it's just a word that's caught the attention of people because there's so many different measurements and research into burnout that it's kind of hard to just know how to measure it all the years back. Certainly there are different phrases for it in the past, like mental breakdown and things like this. So I think probably it's been there in all shapes and forms. And actually, the wording dates back to the 50s, and then all the kind of more modern research started in like the 70s, 80s, when people were realizing that something was going on here that needed to have a sharper focus turned on it. But I think certainly we are now at a place in history where it's very hard to switch off. So having boundaries is all coming from our internal willingness and motivation to maintain boundaries, whereas before work, certainly paid work, life boundaries were easier because you'd go home. Now we can work anywhere at any time. So we do. But yeah, my burnout book, I'm talking a little bit more broadly than just workplace burnout. I am, because the WHO definition, the World Health Organization call it chronic unmanaged workplace stress, which we tend to interpret as meaning paid work. But actually, we now talk about student burnout, parent burnout, informal carer burnout. These are all unpaid roles. We are still doing work. And not only that, but there have never really been any boundaries with those areas. So I think, historically, mums who are getting diagnosed with postnatal problems or health problems like depression, anxiety, probably were burned out. But there was no recognition of that because they had to do everything, carry the mental load.
It's a tricky one, isn't it? Because, and I'm sure we'll get into this, like it's a badge of honor to be super, super busy and to be functioning at high stress levels. In fact, there's a lot of guilt that's carried around for most if we aren't utilizing every single aspect of our waking day. So there's that kind of side of it where it's like, I think a lot of people are probably teetering on burnout and just functioning.
Yeah, I call that kind of high functioning burnout, or, I give a stage model, and I think that's stage 4 of burnout, where you're masking to yourself and to others just how frazzled you really are, just crashing from one thing to another, but it's all hollow and empty. You're not really connected. And, your point about wearing busyness as a badge of honor, I don't know if you got to that bit in the book, because I know you've read it in anticipation of this, but my theory on that is that there's a theory called social comparison theory, which is the idea that we compare ourselves to other people in order to get our self-worth. And, in places where there's an obvious hierarchy, like at school where someone will get higher grades or lower grades, or in an organization where you're looking up to someone, or, where your place is in the pecking order and you have got a sense of your worth. And when we're in an environment where you don't have that, I think we use busyness as our self-worth. So, because being able to offer being useful to the society and world is kind of like our currency. And we are told basically boring people will get bored, and, you need to be producing, otherwise what's the point? And I think we've internalized this. And so we kind of inadvertently, I haven't sat down all day, and I haven't had a moment to think, and we kind of say all these things, and they're genuine, but there is also an edge of like, so get me, I'm important and I've got things to do, people to see.
I certainly have noticed myself do that. I've compared myself sometimes to a couple of friends that have high flying jobs, if you will. And one in particular is also juggling motherhood, and she's always knackered. I go months without speaking to her because she's so frazzled. But there's part of me that's thinking, oh God, I should be more like that. Because we're conditioned to, think that is what a high performing adult should be doing in this world.
Yeah. And I think if someone's listening to this thinking, but I am genuinely busy, there's always too much to do. I completely hear that. And I agree. I feel like that too. The challenge for us, given that there's always things we could be saying yes to and doing, is to try and bring it back and pause a little bit in those moments to work out, if I say yes to doing this thing, what am I saying no to? And does it hit what I really want for myself in this moment, or for, the people who I care most about? Maybe it is my children, maybe it is in this moment, getting something done for work. So prioritizing gets a bit tricky because we're trying to basically do it all at once. And so, in my book, I talk about how we can create a safe enough context for ourselves to slow down, like giving each other permission to say no, not get, upset, and maybe asking for help, but then knowing, that sometimes there are people you might not ask for support because they've got too much on. Like, it's just being compassionate towards one another and trying to give each other permission to slow down and do slightly less.
Yeah, I guess there's two main roads, I suppose, towards burnout, and that is the people that are intentionally being super busy, and maybe some of that is like the badge of honor stuff, or also I think distracting from maybe negative thoughts and wanting to just keep yourself busy. And then there's the other side of that where it feels forced upon, maybe if you are a carer or it is in the workplace, where you're getting a lot of pressure put upon you, especially when that bleeds into what's supposed to be your home life. And that hasn't gotten so much worse since the pandemic, because there's not that physicality for a lot of people of like leaving the office and then walking or driving or riding back to your house and being like, my work is done for today.
Yeah, the transition points between activities have all blurred into each other. Yeah. So it's really hard for us to kind of then pause and, just the walk from home from work would have been a moment to kind of decompress and kind of arrive home, maybe refreshed. And, you've kind of burnt through a bit of that kind of nervous energy that you had in the work context. These things happen less. But yeah, you're right. I want to make sure listeners are kind of also following your point before, that I think there are two reasons that we burn out. Internal kind of pressures add to how we respond to the external pressures. So the internal pressures are kind of like what you said, that we might use busyness to cope with intense emotions, but also have something called insecure striving, which when we're trying to prove ourselves through perfectionism and people pleasing, those are all classics for then dropping our boundaries. But all of this is usually in response to external stressors around. It can be work overload, lack of gratitude, or kind of being shown, rewards for our work, not having enough fairness in our work. There's a few commonly seen factors that really make it all so stressful for us.
So then how do you perhaps recognize some of the warning signs that you are in the stages of burnout versus maybe manageable, or what you perceive to be manageable stress?
Yeah. So in the book, I talk about the 5-stage model of burnout. So the early phase is called the honeymoon phase, which is when, we might kind of be overriding the kind of signs of busyness, at the expense of other things, but because it's exciting, we're kind of caught up in it. But this can progress into listening out for stress or noticing stress, moving into chronic stress if we then override them. And those different stress kind of signs will be different for different people. But classic ones are, beginning to get racing thoughts, beginning to find it hard to fall asleep as easily, tension in your body, so physical signs of stress. And then, of course, for a lot of people, the signs that they kind of come to therapy with or kind of begin to get distressed about, if that moves into chronic stress, the body shouting more loudly at you, and you start to find quick escapism methods such as doom scrolling, eating the junk food, having a glass of wine or beer to kind of unwind, because it's, a quick way to kind of get that relaxation feeling.
Yeah. Buying things on Amazon.
Yeah, exactly. It's hitting go on the buy now button. And those are the signs. And I think a lot of people will have their personal signs, and actually you're invited in the book to think about what they are. There's, examples, but you're kind of coasting a little bit for a lot of people. If they're burning out in a job they know well, you kind of just going through the motions. A lot of people describe it as kind of feeling like you're on autopilot, but not really engaged. It's all feeling a bit hollow and empty. So a parent might say, well, kind of, I feel like I really love my children, but I'm not really enjoying being with them. So it's kind of that you're not getting any joie de vivre,
Oh, yeah. So if this is resonated with somebody listening now, they might be maybe conflicted with, well, this is just life, versus well, I don't know what to do about it. Like, how do I give myself a bit of a break, basically?
Yeah, I think helping yourself by getting to know how your brain and body works. And so that's what the book does. It goes to town with the nervous system description. And I don't know if you got to where I describe it as kind of like gears in a car.
Yeah.
Knowing how, if you're pootling along in gear 2 or 3, every life kind of is manageable. You're kind of recognizing what you need. You're listening into yourself. Moving into 6th gear is when you are frantic and everything feels urgent. That's when you are crashing from one thing to another. And if that carries on for too long, then burnout is when you kind of get stuck down in neutral because the body just gives in and everything just feels a bit too much and like it can't cope. And some people might oscillate between 6 and neutral, but find they rarely ever get back to the green mode. And so, yeah, life at the moment is always busy, and trying to step back a little bit involves practicing self-care. And self-care looks different for different people, and it gets a difficult reputation as something that's a luxury for other people. But really, if you can think of self-care as doing the small everyday actions that build a life for yourself that you don't regularly then want to escape from, you're not going to get a dopamine kick of like thrills from one act of self-care. And I think some people don't stick with the self-care that they need because they don't get an instant uplift in their mood. So in the book, I talk about a set of things you should be doing, daily and then weekly and monthly for yourself to make sure your basic needs are tended to.
Yeah, there's some really good examples.
And, trying to, if you can get a team around you of people who feel the same and want to have the same kind of outlook and outcomes for themselves, that's really powerful. Because I do give an example in the book of someone saying, I've realized I need to put some boundaries in, and starting to do that. And then I get kind of kickback from people kind of frowning and saying, you should be dropping your daughter off at college. Why should she be getting the bus home? Or you should be dropping everything to go and do their shopping, from older relatives and things like this. So, when you make changes that are about positive self-care, it might be that you're not in an environment that nurtures that idea or is singing from the same hymn sheet. So trying to find at least one person who you can then be with, who gets it and sees your mission and feels the same, and you can kind of riff off each other and get the support and celebrate together as well when something is going right, or you manage to say no to something, or rest.
Companionship is so important, and it's making me think. This happened really recently. It was last weekend. I was at like a friend's barbecue, and I was speaking to somebody, and she works for an American company, so time difference is quite different. And it was Friday evening. And there's to an extent, what you're signing up for in terms of, office hours. But then she did have a bit of flexi time. Anyway, it was 8 p.m. our time when the boss messaged and said, right, I need this doing ASAP. Can you get it over to me within the next hour? And she'd made plans to go out for dinner. And she actually managed, she surprised herself at how quickly she was able to pull something together, but she sent it at 8:30 and went, this is the best I can do. I've got dinner plans. And he was like, oh, great, fine. Have a nice weekend. And it wasn't as scary as you think in your head it's going to be. Yeah. I think sometimes you think you're going to get maybe ambushed, or you think of the worst possible outcome, where actually maybe sometimes people are just a bit thoughtless, in terms of team leaders, and like, can you just get that done? And sometimes they need reminding of why.
Yeah, totally. I wonder what it would have been like for her to have sent that before trying to put something together. Hopefully she's listening.
Yeah.
Next time she could just try saying, I want to turn my full attention to this, and I will do on Monday, but I've got plans now. It's really hard, isn't it? And I think if someone knows there's something waiting for them, tolerating that feeling that someone is waiting for them to respond or do something is hard. So I think obviously the best boundary is to not check, but that is really hard because I think we're in a habit of checking. So over the summer holidays, I decided to delete all my social media apps because I was launching my book and it was all busy, and I was like doing a lot of kind of chatting and with people and promoting it on there, and it got a bit
too much.
too much and frenzied, and I was wanting to check and I was wanting to kind of put more out, and it was like just my perspective got a bit warped, I guess. So what I did was, which is a really good strategy, is I told everybody what I was doing. I literally put, I'm deleting my apps for 2.5 weeks. So I kind of thought I can't back down very easily if people are like, why are you here? And then I did delete the apps. So if you delete a social media app, it doesn't delete all your data, it just deletes it. So, and then the best trick is to then delete the saved password. But what boundaries can you do like that? And I got the urges to check, and I got the urges. I was writing social media posts in my head. It all died down after a little while. But I'm talking about days, it took days. So if anyone's trying to put a good habit in place, you need to hold in mind that it takes a minimum of 3 weeks for it to become more natural. Yeah. So I had somebody in the book, actually, Annika, who would check she'd have her laptop on her knees at night before trying to go to sleep, and then was, puzzled that she couldn't get to sleep. So we agreed that she would put her laptop in the boot of the car in the evening, so that she couldn't, as much friction as you can create. At home, if you've got kids, and part of the issue is that, the kids' stuff is there, and it's reminding you, like, I think, again, I talk in the book about how putting a blanket over the kids' mess, so you can't see it. It doesn't magic it away, but at least it's not, you're not seeing all the mess. And I do the same with my home. I work from home a lot of the time, so I literally close and lock the door. Even just closing the door means I'm less likely to pop in here and just do something quickly. Yeah, these little boundaries are really hard, but setting yourself up with an accountability part, or just announcing it is a good way of trying to stick with it, and just recognizing the urge to do more isn't a sign that, you're getting it wrong or you're failing. It's a sign of where your nervous system's at. It's frazzled. Yeah. And actually, the more you get the urges, and the more, your thoughts are racing, thinking, I can't possibly stop now, the more it's a sign that actually what your nervous system needs is a break.
To stop.
Yeah. And you might need to discharge some of that adrenaline, that kind of sympathetic energy. So when I come out of work and I'm feeling like that, and I'm getting more urge to carry on, I usually do something to transition down the gears. So I'm in 6th. I don't just come out off the motorway on 6th into like a 20 mile per hour zone. So I might just scrub, do some cleaning, or do some pencil sharpening, or some kind of colouring or something, because I'm kind of trying to transition into evening mode to be with my kids. But I still kind of need to kind of discharge a bit, and that takes a bit of time, and then I can kind of come back into being a bit more still.
Yeah, I think it's worth pointing out as well, and this was something I learned from the book, because people might still be like, yeah, that all sounds good or whatever, and maybe we can try some of this. But actually, like, if you do ignore the warning signs and it escalates, was it, and correct me if I'm misquoting, if somebody gets signed off with burnout and it's bad, they can be off work for, what is it, 1 to 3 years?
Yeah, so it's not necessarily that you would be signed off for that time, but the level of trauma in your system is a lot to come back from. So, if you think about your body's, these signs of burnout are there, like not struggling to fall asleep, racing thoughts of escapism, like if only I could get ill or break a leg, then I wouldn't have to go to work. Like, these kinds of thoughts. Yeah. They're all signs that it's too much. Yeah. And essentially, if you don't stop or take a break, your body will eventually force a stop for you. And because of the nature of stress, it shifts everything in your body to respond to your heart's beating, and then your blood pressure's higher and all of that. When people have kind of come to a proper forced stop clinical burnout, I've had people, experiencing being unable to get out of bed. A couple of people who've been unable to talk or find words. Somebody who would have non-epileptic seizures. So, the body's can have really intense reactions. And then if that happens, you're trying to recover from that, on top of then learning all the healthy pacing skills. So you basically kind of body's gone into crisis mode. And so it just depends on the person, what the presentation is. But yeah, some of the research did say it's like a trauma reaction that takes a long, long time to come back from.
That is really scary. Perfectionism and burnout, I guess this is more so in the workplace. You touch upon that in the book and in your content. Do you see a lot of perfectionists? Do you find this is quite a common marriage?
Definitely, yeah. Perfectionism is a threat response to having too much on us, where we want to prove ourselves and prevent people from being critical or putting us down. So often perfectionists might have a history, and that's what the book goes into, is trying to help people understand their personal history and, that Achilles heel where, these things might be an issue, where, their self-worth has been hinged on performing in some way or achieving. And so then you're setting really high standards for yourself. In and of itself, perfectionism isn't necessarily bad, wanting to be diligent and get a good job done. But it's when you do that and it's still not good enough, or, then you need to carry on and your foot's always on the gas, and, you're fearful. If it's coming from a place of fear, what will people think, rather than just, I want to do a good job. So there's kind of a nuance there. But yeah, it's really exhausting, and also tends to go alongside with being very hard on yourself, for any kind of missteps. And people can then spend a long time kind of frozen or procrastinating because they don't know how to get started, because they don't know how to make the thing perfect. And that's really exhausting and difficult for people.
Yeah. And I imagine that affects, like you mentioned, students and burnout in our conversation and also in the book. And I could see that being a problem for quite a lot of conscientious students.
Yes, definitely. I've had a few students over the years, or trainee kind of, people in training jobs. And it's really hard because also at that point in your career, you're being told basically to put your needs last and just prove yourself and work up the career ladder quickly. And there's a sense of urgency, like you need to get to the top. And actually, why? Just enjoy the ride and enjoy the role of being in a learner mode, because that's when you've got access to all that support, and everybody knows what it's like to be learning and new, and because they were there once themselves. So it's really hard, but you also recognize that age group, younger people in their 20s and maybe teens, are also a little bit more self-aware and aware of the need for boundaries. So I was talking to a friend who's a very experienced teacher, and she was saying, with a little bit of a roll of her eyes, that actually, younger people coming in keep having these boundaries. They won't just work late. But she also, in the next sentence, said, I'm feeling I'm learning a lot from that. I used to just do whatever I needed. And actually, people are saying no. And whilst that was frustrating in the early days, I kind of actually feel like maybe it's filtering upwards. So I don't know if that's true in other kind of careers. I'd like to think that's the case, and hopefully signs of change.
That's really cool, actually, because when I was a student, I'm thinking, I certainly wasn't any kind of pushover, but there was that sort of respect your elders mentality. And so if you were delegated stuff, and usually because you're young and fit and energetic, then maybe if you've got a part-time job, you do get worked, or like, interning or volunteering, like climbing up the ladder in whatever you want to do. It's reassuring to hear that the young people are putting boundaries in place and saying that's not cool. Wow.
Yes, I think it's lovely, isn't it? And hopefully our generation, will be one of the last ones where we just didn't know how to take care of ourselves. And hopefully generations coming through do have a healthier mindset.
What are some of the main external pressures that you've come across that contribute to burnout?
Okay, so there are 6 that are really kind of commonly seen, and I'm sure you'll recognize these. So overload, which is just when there's too much to do and not enough time, and the expectations too high. And you see this in all sorts of different workplaces. Not having any control, so not having the option and luxury of choice, and feeling like you're being micromanaged, for example, that's really difficult. And I'm sure that's probably what happened with your friend who was being asked to do something. She probably didn't feel like she had the luxury of saying actually no.
Yeah. And she would like to add, she works 12 till 8, so she does her 8 hours. So this was on top of her full day of work that she was asked on a Friday evening.
Yeah, I'm horrified, but not surprised. The third one is insufficient rewards. So if you're kind of slogging away and no one ever says thank you, this is also particularly in jobs where, you're doing the daily grind is quite, the people you're doing it for. I'm just thinking of particularly informal carers and parents. You're doing so many lovely things for them. They don't say thank you, do they? So I think a really lovely thing you can do for a parent is to notice and say, I know that was a really nice thing. You know, you chopped all the grapes up into little things. That's really sweet for them. And, you know, you're really looking after them. But we get that in all sorts of workplaces, don't we? Where we take each other for granted. And so don't save up gratitude for the big things. Show people gratitude for the little things that they're doing that are just kind of part of their everyday job, because it makes a big difference to how burnt out we get. But another external factor is when there isn't enough sense of community where we are. Again, this is where parents can suffer if they haven't managed to kind of connect with anyone like locally, because we used to raise our children in villages and now we don't. It's a very lonely kind of work, but same is true of anywhere. And I know personally as an entrepreneur and sole kind of trader, I struggled with that. Throwing myself into work, not feeling held or having anywhere to go and like feel emotionally supported and connected. And then two more, like when there's a conflict in your values with what you're doing, what you've been asked to do and what you feel to be kind of what you want. So I give examples in the book of, you know, in my NHS job when I was being asked to see X number of clients a week for a certain like less time than I wanted because of the targets and expectations. I wasn't really able to deliver the work that I really wanted for these clients I'm working with. So constantly felt misaligned with my values. And then the final one is when there's inequality, when there's a lack of fairness. You know, you see people being treated differently to you, which kind of goes hand in hand with not feeling rewarded and taken for granted. Those are some really important ones that the research says a lot. And so we're kind of looking out for those things. If someone's in therapy, like, are these things happening? This is probably adding a lot.
Going back to like community support, I think in terms of a person's mental health, this is just across the board, can help in so many different areas. I mean, I've recorded a podcast not that long ago on loneliness. And obviously we know the best antidote to that is community. But like, it just seems to be coming up a lot in other areas in terms of like even research that people that are lonely and feel like they're living very solitary lives are far more susceptible to various mental health conditions.
And physical health.
And physical health as well. Yeah, that's true, actually. Yeah. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that this importance of community. And I suppose for us all listening, it's not just maybe about being aware of our own self when it comes to burning out, but then those around us as well.
Yeah. Loneliness is meant to be actually one of the risk factors for mortality, just as much as smoking and like obesity and all these things that we think more classically as being a risk factor. So it's a really big deal. You know, humans were built to be in communities. And so our physiology is designed to seek that out. Yeah. And in my book, I talk about, like I say, the book is called How to Manage Your Nervous System Before It Manages You. And one of the beautiful things about our nervous system is it responds in a very calming way when we are with people who feel nurturing and feel like they care, and, you know, that we can relax and have fun with, because that gives us, our nervous system picks up signals that we're safe. And so we can relax more easily. And then there's this thing called co-regulation, which means if some other people around us are relaxed, our nervous system relaxation deepens, you know. So if we can find our tribe or find people that give us a sense of that, then we're onto a real winner. Yeah.
Obviously, there's no pill we can take for burnout. What's the general, I know I'm speaking very broadly here, but yeah, what's the kind of prescription, do you think? So I would imagine it varies dramatically depending on the type of burnout and the person's situation.
I mean, what I'd say is there's different layers of intervention. So in an ideal world, the outer layer of this would be the systems around us in politics and organizations, you know, the things that are kind of driving a lot of how we interact with each other and work is coming from, you know, ideas in like capitalism and being pushed to always buy and produce. So I'd love for politicians and big decision makers to go on some compassion courses so they could learn what compassion looks like at all those levels. So they could be woven into the policies, and, you know, we could make sure that people are being rightly compensated for their time and energy in their different areas of work, parenting, carers, when they need time off work because of illness or tending to a bereaved. All of these things make a big difference. And then also in terms of then supporting the workplace to be less toxic, you wouldn't have the manager just calling and putting the needs of their shareholders above the needs of their employees. So in those situations, why does it need to be urgent? The urgency trap is with us everywhere.
Yeah.
And it keeps everyone's nervous system in sixth gear. When you're around someone who seems a bit kind of grounded and like they go more in a more measured way, they've always seem a little bit alternative almost, don't they, these days? Because it's like, they're not just pushed by the sway of busyness.
But so conditioned, aren't we?
But it is possible for us. But we are conditioned because it's a threat. And so we go into threat mode. And so we marry up with that. So I think where I'm going with the answer to your question is we need to try and create the context for ourselves to slow down. But obviously, the tricky thing is that we need to start slowing down to do that. So, buddying up, trying to get other people around you where you can help yourself to be accountable. Like, I'm going to switch my work computer off at this time. I'm not going to check my phone. So please don't send me any messages. Or can we just have a phone call at this time to say, yeah, I'm clocking off. Just putting a sign on your email response that you won't be checking emails at certain times. So setting up expectations and just knowing it will be clunky at first. People will find it really hard. So that's a kind of broad boundaries kind of response. But, in my book, obviously I'm talking about nervous system. There are ways to try and come down the gears. The tools that I teach, like slow tapping and breathing, which I know it's really hard to do those things if you don't really feel signed up for why. But if you take the time to understand what's going on underneath the bonnet of your nervous system, it really does hold it all together and it makes it a bit easier to stick with it, even though your nervous system's screaming, go, go, go. You're able to go, no, but I can get that. That's the urgency from my sixth gear that I don't really need to listen to because I'm not actually in a threat situation here.
What about striking the balance then? So if somebody is ambitious and has goals, how can they continue to prioritize their health and well-being whilst pursuing the goals? And there's not a lot that comes easy. I feel maybe I'm just speaking to you personally here, but I feel like if you really set your mind to something then and go for it, it takes a lot of hard work, determination, So I guess I'm curious what you think about striking that balance, because we need some kind of pressure and stimulation, right? But without flipping into overdrive.
Yeah, I think pacing, just thinking about pacing and setting realistic expectations about reaching the goal. Life's about enjoying the ride. It's not about the destination. We've kind of got there's a fallacy that arrival fallacy, which is when we get there, everything will be happy. But actually, there's so much joy in trying to figure things out when we have got the space and luxury of doing it. But when we do everything, it's like being on a motorway, isn't it? On the motorway in sixth gear. Whereas if you take the country roads, you'll enjoy the ride. You can stop for your picnics. You can stop for loo breaks without feeling like I've got to get there ASAP. So yeah, just whatever your goal hope is, why don't you just extend it by several weeks or months? Do fun stuff as well and have perspective with other things in our lives that are meaningful. It's really important.
In terms of recovery, is this something we could potentially see the doctor about? Because not everybody has the luxury of maybe paying to go private and seeing somebody like yourself. But I'd imagine that's tricky to diagnose if you're a regular GP because of perhaps some of the physical symptoms, like flu-like symptoms, for example.
I think a lot of GPs will take into context what you're telling them about what the stresses are. So if you go to the doctor, I always think it's good to just jot down a few ideas about what you want to say, because it's quite hard when you get into the room to remember it all. But just to say some of the different things that are going on in your life. A lot of people will come into therapy saying, I've not got much going on. I feel really rubbish. And then they'll list out all these things. And I'm saying to them, actually, that's a lot. No wonder you feel like this. So hold in mind that it's very common for people to minimize how much they've got going on. So that's why it's helpful just to think what's going on in my personal life, what's going on in my work life, jot that down, go in, and the GP will take all of that into account. And it might be very helpful for them to then be able to, they can then sign you off work. And burnout isn't something that is an official diagnosis over here, but they are likely to put something in your notes that says stress at work. You know, you can have a conversation with them about what feels right. But yes, the GP is at one port of call. Absolutely.
Usually I'd ask you the Happier Life Project /5 and 5 to wrap up the episode, but we've already done that. So I've already got your answers. But the one question I can ask you, which is always the final question that we close the episode with in relation to today's topic. What is a simple, actionable first step that we can take when it comes to either avoiding or, I've put the word confronting, which even that sounds quite jarring, burnout, that will help us on our mission to building a happier life?
Probably one of the most actionable steps I talk about at the moment, which people like, is to think about the transition points in your day. So that might be coming off this podcast recording, for example, for us. Mm-hmm. Before we go and do the next thing, just giving yourself 30 seconds to a minute just to check in with what you're feeling, what you need. So, this is good because then you can think, well, what do I need right now? My energy levels are a bit higher right now. I don't give lots of podcasts, so I kind of feel like I'm a bit warm and like I might have energy I want to expend. So then I can run up and down the stairs a few times or give it a shake. And after this, I'm going to go down and talk to my kids, and they've come home from school. So they'll probably have lots of rubbish to throw at me that I need to then contend with. And if my head's still in the podcast, I'm going to struggle with that. So it's also just thinking about, okay, I might just need a moment, pop my hands over my heart, just to kind of channel being my mum mode, and then, going in and seeing them. So you wouldn't walk out into the snow without putting a coat on. You would look and think, what do I need in order to do that? So just think of that with your activities throughout the day. Like, what do I need right now from what I've just gone from in order to go to the next thing, and checking in, listening to your body.
I absolutely love that. That's fantastic advice. Thank you so much. I literally had about, I would say 80 questions on this just from reading your book. And then, of course, in my true style, I've barely looked at my notes and just enjoyed the conversation. But hopefully we've got all the key points out to our listeners. But to pivot to the book, which is available in, actually, one more question, inspiration behind the book. You've covered so much ground in this. This isn't like something that takes somebody not that much time. This is a really detailed account which helps people wherever they are on the different stages of burnout and whatever reasons they've come to be in this position. So I can imagine this kind of effort came from a story, a passion, of yours.
Yeah, because there are books already on burnout. I felt a bit sheepish kind of coming to the book world and saying, I think I have something to add. And a lot of them are good. But what I thought was missing and was needed was more detail about the neuroscience, that I felt my understanding from using that in the world of trauma, working with people who are traumatized, would, be really helpful to share. So that's why I talk about the polyvagal theory. And then also I wanted the book to have almost like the flow that you do in therapy, where you're assessing it, you're giving what's called psychoeducation, the education about the nervous system, and then moving on into understanding your backstory and all the different pressures that might have come from your early life experience that we don't always connect the dots for. And then, moving into, so this is why you often get stuck, or you can't, the things that might help, like mindfulness and journaling, just don't seem to touch aside, or you can't seem to ever kind of stick at. And I felt like all of that advice was out there already, and I didn't want to just provide a book that said, just pace yourself, just do your mindfulness, because actually I wanted to create, this is why it's been hard, doesn't mean it's impossible, and this is how you can do those things that can help you in the long term. But also I wanted a book, that was for men and women, because I think both men and women burn out. And a clinical psychologist at that point hadn't really written a book on burnout. It was mostly a domain kind of written about by coaches and occupational health professionals. So burnout is a clinical issue as well when we get to that kind of high functioning or stopping kind of place. So I wanted to have that flavour as an option for people. And can I let people know that it has a different title over in the US? Is that okay?
Yes, please. That was, you just literally taking the words right out of my mouth.
So it's currently available in the UK under the title Burnout, How to Manage Your Nervous System Before It Manages You. The original working title was The Trauma of Burnout, because it perfectly blends my trauma background and specialism with burnout. And that's the title in the US, and it's available to pre-order over there now, comes out in January 2025. And the reason that we didn't go with the trauma of burnout over here was just because just the editor thought they preferred bigger focus on the subtitle. So we kind of just went with that. And the US team quite liked the trauma of burnout. So it's got a different picture on the cover and all sorts. It's been fun choosing pictures for the covers and all of that. Like, that's been the fun part.
Fab. Well, we'll put both links in the episode show notes as well.
What the publisher said was if I just have like one link, one landing page with the two then links to the US and the UK as buttons on that one page. So I don't know if you want to just do that, and then it's, people can decide when they get there which nationality they are.
Thank you so much. And then if people want to follow you on Instagram, you're back on it?
Yes, I've got a bit more time now, so I'm on yours, Instagram. LinkedIn, I'm enjoying a lot, so if anyone's over there.
And is that the same as Instagram, Dr. Claire Plumbly?
Yes.
Yeah, and then you've obviously got the website, drclaireplumbley.com as well, which I'm sure will take you to where you can purchase the book too. Thanks again, Claire, and great to see fantastic book. I think if it's not helpful for the person individually, it's certainly helpful for somebody they know, because it's so unfortunately common these days, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for reading it and saying your kind words about it. It means a lot.
Hello, Gabby back with you. Thanks again to Dr. Claire Plumley. And thank you to you, my friend, for listening to this episode of the Happier Life Project podcast. Now for the important housekeeping before I sign off. If you are suffering with your mental health, there is a crisis button on the My Possible Self app, which will signpost you to the correct information for immediate expert advice. Those of you who are listening on one of the podcast platforms, the My Possible Self app is completely free to download, so you don't need to worry about it costing you anything. If you are in crisis or you think you may have an emergency, please do call your doctor or the emergency services immediately. The views expressed in this podcast are solely those of the interviewer, which is me, and the interviewees. The content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered as a substitute for professional or medical advice. Our partners at the Priory Healthcare are not involved in the production or content of this podcast. If you are listening on one of the podcast platforms right now, please do subscribe and leave a review if you've got the time. And I'm sorry I repeat myself every week, but it really does help us to grow, helps us to continue doing what we're doing, and helps us to get our material in front of as many people as possible to help them on their mental health journey. And to find and follow us on social media, if you don't already, we are most active on Instagram at MyPossibleSelf, and I've been at Radio Gabby. Do take care, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.